Well, good morning, everybody. It's Saturday morning early. I am not a morning person, but I'm glad you're here. I'm guessing some of you are morning people. We are talking this morning about designing your own curriculum and figuring out how it is that you pull together different resources and don't just follow a set curriculum and do everything that they tell you to do. So we'll talk about how that happens, what the kind of process is that some of us use, and share our experiences, and then let you guys ask questions about that. But before we do, let us begin in prayer for our children this morning, I think. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Mother Mary, by virtue of your divine motherhood, you have become mother of us all. I place the dear ones God has given me under your loving protection. Be a protecting mother to my children. Guard their bodies and keep their thoughts ever holy in the sight of their Creator and God. Guard their hearts and keep them pure and strong and happy in the love of God. Guard always their souls and preserve in them faithfully the glorious image of God they received in baptism. Always, Mother, protect them and keep them under your motherly care. Supply in your all-wise motherhood for my poor human deficiencies and protect them from all evil. Amen. That's one of my daily prayers. I need Mary to kind of fill in the gaps where I fail badly. She does a pretty good job too. So how do you design your own curriculum? And just as introduction, really when you're homeschooling, you have lots of options. And if you were to divide all the options into two categories, it would be go to a curriculum provider, purchase their plan and their books, and do it. As written, maybe a few tweaks here and there, but you pretty much are following a full program is the way I would term that. Some of us look at that and say, yeah, but I want to change that and 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 that, or I like this from this program and this from this program, and I want to do them together. So once you start to substitute a lot, and you maybe are not just tweaking, but you're totally changing and drawing from different resources, I think you turn into an eclectic homeschooler, and you turn into that mom who is designing her own curriculum, pulling things together. We use the catch-all phrase eclectic, but I think it's important to note that within homeschoolers who design their own or make their own plans, there's Charlotte Mason, classical, school at home, unit study, unschoolers. There's all the different philosophies or approaches to homeschooling still happen within the eclectic catch-all. We just kind of pick and choose rather than following somebody's plan. So if you are the mom who is trying to figure out, should I do that? Or if I want to do that, how do I do that? Or I've been doing it, but I'm not really sure I'm getting it all, or what I'm doing, picking the right things. That's kind of what we're going to start to talk about today. Today's call, we'll focus on how you choose those materials and resources and that kind of phase of it. And then Sunday night's call, we'll focus on how you, now once you have that all chosen, how you map it out during the year with lesson plans, schedules, and decide what to teach when. You have to think about that a little bit as you choose materials, as Amy will touch on. But as far as the actual nitty-gritty of making those plans yourself, that will be the next call. So we can certainly entertain some of those questions at the end, but keep that in mind. So that's all I wanted to say to introduce us. Amy is a dear friend and a wonderful mentor mom for other homeschoolers. And so I invited her here this morning to share her experiences and wisdom about choosing your own curriculum and how that works in her family. So I'm going to let you take it, Amy.
So how to start? When you're choosing to do your own curriculum, it's a good idea to decide why you're doing that. And it's very helpful to have a sort of mission statement for your homeschool. And I would definitely start there. If you haven't written one, if your kids are old enough, write it with your kids. What's important to you? What do you want them to experience? What do you want them to learn by the time you leave? Sarah McKenzie has a really good thing in her Teaching from Rest book about what do you want them to remember in 10 or 15 or 20 years when they're done with homeschool? How do you want it to feel? Keep those things in mind when you're going through trying to decide what to do for your homeschool, because it has to be your homeschool for your family to fit your kids and your needs as mom. It can be very individualized, which is why homeschooling can be so great. You have that opportunity to be flexible with your schedule and with the curriculum that you choose. So own that for all that you can, because that's a great benefit we have with homeschooling is the flexibility, and it's wonderful to do that as much as you possibly can. And that's honestly one of the big reasons that we ended up choosing to go eclectic or making our own, because as I was looking at different curriculum providers, as Jenny said, I'm like, oh, that looks good, but I really don't like X, Y, and Z. And then I'd look at somebody else and that would look wonderful and it sounds great and my best friend uses it. But then I look at it and realize, I'm an introverted mom who hates people talking to me. Having my kids do narrations to me for multiple subjects for multiple kids would be torture. So we can't do a curriculum that's going to involve a lot of narration because that would be awful for our family. We could do narrations for 1 or 2 subjects, but not for all of them. That curriculum is not going to be a good fit for us. My first 2 kids are boys. Doing a school at home workbook only curriculum would be torture for them. As much as I would like that, because it would be so easy to just say, here, do this workbook and do this workbook and do this workbook. And for some families that works great, but I knew my kids well enough to know that that would not work. I have a kid who learned flashcards for math by running circles around the living room. That is how we learned math. There is no way he would sit for multiple workbooks for school. That just is not going to be a good fit for him. And so when you're looking at curriculum and what to choose, you have to know yourself and you have to know your kids and you have to know the season of life you're in. When we started homeschooling, I had a 6-week-old. We had a 6-week-old. I had a kindergartner, a toddler, and a 6-week-old. And so anything that was going to have to require long spans of attention for me and for me to really be with it was not going to happen because I was not sleeping. And I had a toddler wreaking havoc on the house. So it had to be something that could be done in little 15-minute bites throughout the day so that we could feel successful with school, not overwhelm the 5-year-old, and I could still go nurse the baby. And I'm not one of those people that can read and nurse the baby. Kudos to those people who can. I'm not that person. So we had to find little pieces of curriculum that would work to fill short little bits of time that we had available. And that brings up another point. When you're picking curriculum, keep in mind you have limited time, limited money, and you have limited energy. You are one person. You cannot do it all. Don't even try. So if you have limited time, you're not going to be able to do the perfect program for everything. You're going to have to pick a writing program or a reading program or a math program. And then if that one thing takes a lot of time, you're going to have to give up time on the other subjects to find something that your kids can do independently or that will not take as much mom time. I call those programs mom intensive. You can only handle 1 or 2 mom intensive programs. Other than that, you're going to have your kids do independent work and teach them to be independent with a lot of their work. With limited money, for example, we chose a math program that is time intensive and on the pricier side. Knowing that, and I now have 4 kids doing school, I know that I will have to teach math to 4 kids. That is a lot of time. So when I'm planning my school year, I have to balance that out with other programs for other subjects that aren't going to take as much time. And because we've put a lot of money into that math program, aren't going to take as much money for the other things. So we can look at things like used books or more popular curriculum so I can be able to reuse the books, and that helps. And then the limited energy portion. Again, you're only one person. If you have those mom intensive programs for everything, it's not going to get done and you're going to feel awful. And we don't want that. We want you to feel successful and we want you and your kids to feel successful. So you need to balance those things out with the programs that you choose. And the way I choose is I will go through and I'll make a list and I'll say, okay, kindergarten, we need reading instruction, we need writing practice, we need math, and we need religion. And then I will go through and pick a curriculum for each of those things. And I might pick them from 4 different places. I might pick 3 from one place and 1 from another place, and that's totally fine. It's just finding the way to balance to meet the needs of that list of the subjects we need to cover, and check your state laws to make sure you're covering those things too. Because if you're in a different state, you may have more requirements than those 4 things for kindergarten. And we just fill in the spots for those, and I'll think, okay, well, we're doing this for math, so I know that's going to be mom intensive. It's taking a bit of our budget. So when we look at a reading program, I need to look at something that's not going to be as mom intensive, even though reading is for kindergarten. That's the other thing. When you're in kindergarten, first grade, even second grade, you're going to be sitting with those kids. So you have to balance that out with your older kids too. So by the time my kids hit 3rd or 4th grade, I'm having them do a lot more independent work because they can, and because I need them to, because I have a younger kid that I have to work with, and I've always had a younger kid that I need to work with. So when the kids get older, they need to be able to do it by their own so that I can help the other kid. Because once you get them reading, they can do everything. And it's much easier once you get them reading, but you have to get them reading first. So once you get them doing that, it becomes a little bit easier to balance those things out. When you get established with your, I call those 4 R's, the reading, writing, math, and religion, then you can add in science and history. And what we like to do, again, to keep that balance, is I try to find a science or a history, some years both, that they can do together. Something like Scola Rosa, I think somebody mentioned, is really good for that, because your whole family is doing the same type of science or the same type of history. So that can help you keep that balance amidst the mom intensive and your time and your energy, and making sure that you have some of you left at the end of the day. And then as far as what to choose to go in, I look at different curriculum provider sites. The Colby, the Seton, the Mother Divine Grace, Mater Amabilis, all those places, and kind of get a feel for what they're offering and what they're requiring for different grade levels. Those books, How to Teach Your Whatever Grader, or What to Teach, what your blank grader needs to know, like what your kindergarten needs. So those are great resources when you're starting out. Kind of gives you a template for what to cover. When I first started, I really liked the books Well-Trained Mind and The Educated Child. Those helped me get like a grade level reading or template of what to do. What we did find with what we were doing is that sometimes if we did choose the everyone together for science and history, it didn't always touch on what a grade level standardized test would cover. So that was when I started giving standardized tests, I found out my kid didn't do well on the social studies or history part. Well, it's because for that grade, their focus for social studies was neighborhoods, and we had done ancient history. Well, of course they're not going to do well on the test then, because that's not what we covered, but that's okay. I still know they learned something. It's just not what somebody else thought they should have learned at that grade level. So we just had to become okay with that, and we'd find workarounds. So when I found my kids didn't do well on reading maps portion, we added a maps book in the next year. Just a quick little thing, and they can do it independently, and it gives them that practice even of like filling in bubbles, because it had a few pages like that. So things like that really help. I think that's the main points that I had to make. If I think of something else, I'll pipe in, but that was the big thing. Know yourself, know your kids, know what season of life you're in, and it makes it so much easier to balance those things out.
Absolutely. No, those are fantastic. I think it's really great that you started with decide your why and why you're doing this and what you want to accomplish. I know that we had a whole call on that, on why we homeschool. So if you haven't watched that one, that might be a good one to watch, because for me, every year I look at that again and remind myself, why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish in homeschooling? So that when I go to look through all the pretty books and fancy catalogs, I can figure out, does that match with my goals and my why? Because a lot of times I can go, oh, that looks so wonderful, I would so love to do that. But guess what? That's not my priority. That's not what our family needs. And so it helps center me once I've gotten that in writing and I've thought that through. So yeah, I mean, you have fantastic tips. Knowing yourself, your kids, your season, so very, very important. That balance. I think that what I see a lot of times with homeschoolers that are just starting out or are pulling their kids is not a bad thing, but they're very idealistic, right? And we want, especially those of us who create our own curriculum, because we can do whatever we want. So it can be the perfect curriculum. The problem with that is that then it's too much, and there's no humanly possible way you as a mom can teach 4 kids all that beautiful, wonderful, perfect stuff. It's just, we're limited, or we can't afford the best program. So we kind of like figure something else out and we hodgepodge it, and then it doesn't work out as well because it's not what we wanted it to be. So it takes a lot of pondering and balancing. I think it is important to remember that designing your own takes more time and effort and thinking and research. So if that's not your season, then it might be better to just buy the CHC box, or the Seton box, and do that for a while. And in a different season, begin to tweak and pull. But the benefits of choosing your own curriculum, I think, for our family have really been that each kid can do what works for them. My 2 oldest are very different. I have a language arts, perfect, wonderful reader, writer kid. And then I have a STEM kid who is all math and science. Like, if we were doing the same exact curriculum for both kids, they would not do as well. Now, they do some things the same, because obviously if they're not strong in an area, I want to challenge them and I want to help them grow. But it would be, if I was just doing one curriculum for everybody, there would be, that disconnect. But that's fine. There's going to be gaps. That's the other thing I wanted to say that I wrote down. That Amy, it's morning, sorry. You mentioned that, you choose those 4 R's and you choose kind of the key things, and that you noticed with like standardized tests and things, there's gaps. Mm-hmm. Just okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean you chose wrongly. That just means, okay, that's something I need to add to my list to make sure to teach them at some point. But you get to decide when to teach that as a homeschooler, unless you have a specific state law that says you have to do certain things.
Yeah, I would say you choose wrong if you start crying or your kids are crying on a regular basis. That means you chose the wrong thing. Don't keep punishing yourselves. Right. Move on. Pick something else.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes, if you don't be too quick to change curriculum. Don't be like, the first time we have a fight or a cry over math, we're going to switch programs, because I did that, not for the first time maybe, but after a little while. But I did have an experience with my oldest where we're beating our head against the wall with math every day. And I thought this was the program that was going to fit her best in her learning style, but it was just so hard. And then we'd switched curriculum and it was still so hard. And then we switched curriculum and it was still so hard. So I went back to the first curriculum, because it wasn't the curriculum. It was, math is always going to be hard for her. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn as a mom how to be gentle and encouraging and prevent her from shutting down when it got hard. So it wasn't about the curriculum. But if you've tried all the things and you've tried to be, change the time of day and change the approach and let them give you feedback on what would help them, there are some things that aren't going to work, and it's okay to ditch them. That's a good point. The other thing I wanted to add is that I think something that maybe Sarah McKenzie said, we're quoting her a lot, is that because you can't do all the things that you want to do, because being idealist is good to have aspirations, but you just can't fit it all in the perfect way, is each year perhaps pick some kind of focus and say, this is going to be the year that we get to do that really awesome history program. And next year, we're going to put it on the back burner and just listen to audio books and do some, workbooks. And that next year, maybe our focus is the writing. This is going to be our writing year. And so I'm going to purchase the best writing curriculum for this year, and then everything else will fill in the gaps. Keep in mind for those of you that are just trying this out and thinking, I'm just going to homeschool for 1 year and see how it goes, you're not teaching them everything they need to know in 13 years. You're teaching them a snapshot this year that would be different in any classroom they go to across the country. Even in the same school, kids are being taught a little bit differently by different teachers in the same grade. But if you are considering doing this longer, you're doing this longer, give yourself that grace of, I've got time. I don't have to do it all this year. I want to do this history and that science and this, that's great, but some of that on the schedule for next year so that you don't overwhelm yourself and kind of pick that ideal. And then something else, and I didn't jot it down. For me, I started out mostly following Mater Mobile's plans and tweaking when I couldn't find a book or didn't want to pay the price for the book. And then I tweaked as I went and kind of evolved into doing my own thing, because I still start with that in the younger grades as a cornerstone and pick the things I know we love from that. But I have learned which curriculum providers I love and which curriculum providers work well for my kids, because they all have a little bit of a different style, a different flavor. So like last week, I was like, I have got to make some book lists, because they keep saying that some of the providers might sell out of books by August, and I'm not good about ordering early. I was like, okay, I'm going to order early. And the first thing I did was go to all the websites of all the curriculum providers that I love. I mean, it's like less than 5, but that's where I start. And I say, okay, I'm going to have a 4th grader. What do 4th graders learn in Mother Divine Grace? And then that gives me a framework. And if I don't like that particular book or resource, I can find a similar one somewhere else. But that's kind of how I start when I'm ready to really look at the next year. It gets easier as you go with each kid, because you know more what you like. It's easier to identify what works with kids. When you're just starting to do this, it's more time and effort than you're going to realize. But it does get easier each year. And also, I keep lists in the back of my planning binder of things I want to look at for next year, like a next year list for each kid. And that way I can put it somewhere and say, I might get to that next year. It looks really great, but I'll look at that next year. So it gets easier as you go, but it is a lot of like figuring out in the beginning. Amy, you were going to jump in.
Oh, I was just thinking, one of the things that we also do to kind of help plan for the next year is at the end of the year, I give my kids a survey of their homeschool year. And I ask them, what's your favorite thing? What's your least favorite thing? What are you most proud of? What did you hate? And I ask them what they want to learn about. And a lot of times I'll get really good ideas for what I can plug in for next year. Last year I had a kid who wanted to learn about animals and science. So we pulled in that for science. And I had a kid who wanted to learn about architecture. So and Spanish. So this year we found a summer program for Spanish and for architecture for a 5th grader, because that's what they wanted to learn. And I'm like, okay, we can do that. Sure. One of my kids really wanted to learn Latin. So when we got to that point, by the way, that was the curriculum that kept making us cry, because we couldn't do Latin. So I found that's the other way to balance it, is you outsource things. So you don't have to do all the curriculum at home. You as the homeschool mom have to manage it. That's Sarah McKenzie again. So don't feel like you have to do everything yourself. I have a friend who says the perfect is the enemy of the good. Good enough is still good. It doesn't all have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. Your kid just has to be learning some things, and they have to be showing progress in their learning. But they're not, as Jenny said, they're not going to learn everything just this year. But as long as they're showing progress and you get to dump some more information into their head, then you're doing good.
That's an excellent point. Yes, I like that. That's very good to remember. Very good, very good. And when they get older, especially, including them in those decisions is so much fun, because they get excited and they know what they like and don't like, and you can kind of ask them. We're going to do that next week. We get to do interviews and talk about what they want to do for next year. And then I have a senior. She's pretty much told me what she wants to take next year as far as coursework, and I'm finding the resources. So she knows what she wants to learn now. I just have to figure out, what we're going to use to do that. So that's a really important point. And outsourcing can be done at any level. It is totally fine to, stick your kid on a math learning website or an online class, or watch a documentary and call that, whatever subject area that is, because like Amy said, you have limited time, limited resources, and you've got to figure that out. So those are good things. They're, again, back to what you said, that idealism is good to have and good to nurture, but it's not, you just have to be practical too, right? You have to be practical with your needs. So that all being said, what questions do you guys have about how you go about this, or how you make sure I don't know what you're doing is on the right path. You guys thought of questions? Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
So I did that as well. Because I wasn't comfortable at all homeschooling when I started, I picked everything that was scripted. And so that's how I chose. I looked at the well-trained mind, and I pick and chose, and we've pretty much stayed with mostly what I chose at the beginning. I had a daughter once she got to middle school that I thought she would do better on some recorded courses. And so we did Homeschool Connections, and their math program was different than ours. So it was a spiral, whereas we did Matthew C, which is
Mastery.
Mastery, yes. And so now I have to take her all the way back because she didn't master those things. And so now we're behind in math because I switched. And so just knowing whether, knowing if it was the right curriculum, now I know that what I chose was, but I thought I had to switch because that's what they offered. And I'm questioning now with my younger son too, because our state is requiring those tests. And like Amy said, it's just not, we just haven't covered that part yet. And he's very good at math, but because it doesn't spiral, he hasn't learned that concept yet. And so I guess my questions are, I'm not very good with lesson plans. I pick these things and we just start to do it. And then when we're done, we're done. So I need to know how to better take those books and make a plan for them for the year so that we can maybe finish something. We just go on the next year, but I feel like I should have some sort of order with that. And then what you mentioned about checking Seton or Mother of Divine Grace for what is the child learning at that stage, and then try to incorporate that into my school, because when I look at those sites, I feel, well, they do a lot, and I'm not really doing all of that. Am I not up to the right standard? So that's a question I have too.
Those are good questions. I think that's key. To mention when you talked about the math standardized test, because we use Matthew C, so I can totally speak to this. And I'm not required to standardize tests, but periodically I do. And I have found that they don't do poorly on the test. They don't score in the top percentile because there's stuff they don't know. But when I've done it, I find that they at least pass it, and I'm okay with that. Okay. I don't know if that's your experience or not, but if they're in the Matthew C grade level, then I just find that I can look at that and go, oh, well, you didn't know that, and that's okay. I don't expect you to know that. So you're not going to get a perfect score. Like that, my expectation is lowered on the testing. Because like Amy said, it's testing them on stuff we didn't cover. So that's kind of something I don't know, that I know that I've adapted to. And like I said, we'll go through kind of lesson planning and figuring that out in a lot of detail tomorrow night. But it's a lot of math. It's a lot of picking up books and figuring out how many lessons are there, how many days a week do I want to do it, how much can we get done in a day, and dividing that all up. And it's a lot of unless you're buying lesson plans or it has the plans like where you do lesson 1 this day, lesson 2 this day. If your resources have that, you don't really need your own plans. But if they don't have that, then you have to spend the time. And I know Amy and I both agree, like the summer is like key to get all of that done ahead of time so that I can just go through the year. Pam Barnhill talks about putting your year on autopilot. Once you do all the prep work, it's much easier to get the material done in the year that you want. And then my thoughts on whether the sites, the curriculum providers do too much are sometimes yes, sometimes no, and depends on your season and what your kids need. So I love that Amy, I know you're going to jump in here, but talked about get those 4 R's, and the rest is kind of gravy until they get to middle school, I would say. As long as they're reading, writing, doing math, and learning religion, you are doing enough. But we definitely don't want we definitely want to give them a good, solid education as well. So we have to kind of balance with, are we doing these things consistently, ideally every day, but every day, I mean, I know sometimes there's days that we take off, which is fine, but are we being consistent and are they making progress? One of the things I learned when we lived in Florida and I did have to do reporting is we did an assessment and the state evaluation, and the state requirement for the evaluator was whether or not our child made progress from the beginning of the year to the end of the year in that subject area. They didn't have to be on grade level. They didn't have to meet certain standards. They just had, that individual had to see that they made progress and improved. So that's how I would evaluate, am I doing enough with my kids? Are they making progress each year? So that I can see, what's too much and what's not too much. Amy, you probably have thoughts on these things too.
Yeah, you covered most of it. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just thinking with the progress, I have a friend who also has to make portfolios for the state they live in. So, and I think Colby does this as well. And you pull a work sample from the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And I know for me, like when I'm clearing out all the files at the end of the year to get ready for the next year, it is sort of amazing to look back on where we started and see how far they've come. So even if they didn't do perfect on that standardized test, I can still see progress, whether it's, hey, this kid learned cursive this year, so their writing's different, or look at all this cool stuff we did for history, or at the beginning of the year, this kid was reading 2 sentences, and now he's finishing chapter books. Within that, there is progress. I think because we're in it all the time, we don't notice it as much. It's like when you meet a relative you haven't seen forever and they're like, your kid's gotten so big. And you're like, I didn't notice because I see them every day. And it's sort of the same thing with schoolwork. You don't notice the progress you're making because you see it every day. One thing about the math, and yes, switching from mastery to spiral is tricky. That is one thing a lot of experienced homeschool teachers will say, with math, don't jump around if you can help it. Pick a program and stick with it from elementary through high school if you can, because that is one of the places where it's hardest to make up the gaps. And so that is one thing. If you are choosing your curriculum, if you pick a math curriculum in 1st or 2nd grade, you need to stick with it as much as you possibly can. I know that doesn't always work out, but as much as you possibly can. That's one thing I wouldn't recommend, jumping curriculum from year to year as much as you can with other things.
That's a really excellent point. Excellent point. I have a friend who really does well when she sees her progress and feels like she's accomplished. Because you don't see the progress, right? So she actually checks off days, even though we don't have requirements here on number of days in Texas, but she keeps attendance, so to speak, of did we do these the main 4 subject areas, the required number of days in a school year. What is it, 180? I don't even know because we're in Texas.
I think so, yeah.
And so for her, she feels like they've done well if they've checked those 4 boxes for 180 days. And it might be not all on the same day. She kind of jumps around different days, do different things. Because I think as long as you're being consistent with the material that you do have in front of you, you're either going to see progress and your kids are going to learn, or you're going to hit a wall and realize that there's a problem and your kids need help, whether from you changing things or getting them outside help. And then you'll know, from there, because there are kids where you can keep going and they don't make progress. And if that's what you're hitting, they might have, a learning disability, or it might be a neurological kind of neurodifference that you need to approach things differently, or it just might be their learning style and they just you can't explain it the right way. So just being consistent and making progress is probably the best way to tell if you're doing too little or too much, is just seeing that. I also have friends, just to go back to the 4 R's, that, in elementary school, you really don't have to do anything but the 4 R's. Unless your state is like, absolutely, you must have a written curriculum for science and history. Because even just getting library books and going on nature walks can totally count as science. And remember that when they get older, and I know you know this, Deanna, but for everybody else, as they get older, they repeat everything. So they learn the same science and history in elementary school, middle school, and high school at a different level, of course, and their level of understanding increases. But if you are one of those families that just is overwhelmed and needs to simplify, then elementary is the time to do it. And then outsourcing in middle school and high school is the way to do it, to simplify. There are affordable ways to do that. It does usually cost, something. But I think you balance the cost with the time and the energy. I could buy the perfectly wonderful curriculum that we could open and start with and go, or I could spend 2 weeks designing my own curriculum, solid, without interruptions, which is impossible. So you have to kind of balance those two things. Those are great. Does that help, Deanna? Do you have any follow-ups on that?
No, that's very helpful. Yeah, just to the part about being consistent and making sure he progresses, because I listened to you. You had a talk a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, on Homeschool Connections about seeing if they progress from the beginning to end. So this year, I purposely made a chart and checked what he was doing at the beginning of the year, and I have seen the progression, but now it just has me worried because of that test where I haven't had to have them take these tests before, and now I have to teach to a test. So
is the state requirement that they pass it or that they take it?
They have to be within the 15th percentile. Okay. So that's a pretty low percentile. I feel like you might be able to pass that.
I think you're good.
Yeah.
I think you're good.
Yeah, I will say whenever we have done the test, it doesn't tell me anything I didn't already know. I have a kid who's horrible in geometry. He always does horrible on the geometry questions. I have kids who are great at reading and they're horrible at spelling or punctuation, and they always don't do well in those sections, but it all averages out, and it's a nice little snapshot, but it usually doesn't tell you anything you didn't already know from being with your kid every day.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And it can just reinforce, okay, I need to keep doing spelling and punctuation with this kid. I can't just back off on that. That needs to continue to be a focus. Yeah. And there's no, there is value in, I wouldn't say teaching to the test, but I would say preparing for the test and doing practice tests throughout the year, or and then that way you can fill in some of those gaps throughout the year, if that's something that, you're concerned with. Because I know some kids, as they get older, especially, they want to know how they did on those tests, and they're not going to feel good about a low score. So to have them practice periodically throughout the year is a strategy that some moms use, so that they can say, oh, you missed that. Why did you miss that? Because we haven't taught that. Okay, well, I'll give you a brief overview, so maybe you can get the question right next time, to boost their confidence that they feel okay. But I think it's important to tell our kids what Amy said in the beginning. Those tests are a test of what those other people think you should know, but not necessarily what you do know. Because if we are testing on what you do know, a lot more than is in those tests.
Yeah.
So I know we welcomed Carol a little bit late here, but if you guys have questions, we're kind of in our Q&A session on this, and what thoughts you guys might have, or concerns, ideas. Maybe you've done this and we haven't said something that you think is important. No? That's okay. Yeah, I think that my curriculum catalogs are starting to come in the mail. I got my Rainbow Resource catalog yesterday.
It's much smaller than it used to be.
I was about to say,
it used to be like phone book size.
Yeah, this used to be, look how thin it is. But because I make my own thing, I'm always looking to see what's out there. They're always making new curriculum, new materials, improving them, coming out with new editions, so that, as a design your owner, you don't have to stick with the same thing K through 12. Math, I agree with Amy, you should stick with a program. But even then, they change it and tweak it, or they might offer something additional. Like with Math UC, we now have the option of digital packs. and we can go, they can watch all their videos online. I love that for my older kids, and I don't have to rely on the DVD. But I'm always looking to see what's out there, what's new, because there are things that work better with different kids. And I would love my kids to feel good about their learning. And that's one of my goals. I am willing to sacrifice my time and energy and a little money to find a material that will work best with a kid, and maybe boost their confidence and their positivity about school. And that's something that I like to do, is kind of look for those things. But yeah, those catalogs are coming, and I'm sitting down and looking at those books, and then I'm ordering those books. You can't lesson plan. This is what I was going to say. You can't lesson plan and figure out all those what to do each day until you have all the materials. Yeah. It's just, you have to have it all in front of you. You have to think about it a little bit, because you can't, like Amy said, you have to budget your time and your energy throughout the year. You can't, the teacher intensive, you have to find out how teacher intensive it is, so how many lessons there are in a year, so that will I have to do this every single day, or can I do it twice a week? But you can't really, map out those details until you have it. Hi, Carol. Let's see. How many started with an out-of-a-box curriculum and then later changed to building your own curriculum? As I said in the beginning, I didn't quite out of the box. We used Mater Amabiles, not exclusively, but kind of primarily in kinder and first. And then I started branching out in second, and really didn't, but I still was branching out a little in kinder and first, because we didn't do everything that they offered. Amy?
When we started out, I bought the lesson plans for CHC, and then I looked at them and I'm like, yeah, we're not doing this. So I tried, but I really didn't get very far.
Okay. I think I had those lesson plans at one point too. Mm-hmm. I tried a couple different lesson plans, and I was like, yeah, I'm like scribbling over them too much.
Right.
Why would I spend $20 on this or $40 on this when I'm changing it so much? That's how you know that you need to switch to kind of your own thing. Deanna, did you say you've done since the beginning kind of your own thing?
Yes, I've always picked my own. Like I said, I read the Well-Trained Mind and saw what they recommended, and then from friends, I would look at their books,
yeah.
And I thought, well, that might work for us, and so I always just picked something here, put something there. But for me, it had to be scripted
Sure.
for my math and English,
mm-hmm.
and those programs worked. So I've kept those.
Don't change what's not broken.
Yeah.
If it's working, keep doing it. That's really important. That's great. It made me think of something, and it just escaped my mind about building your own. It'll come back to me. Anna asked, what catalogs do you recommend? That depends on what style of homeschooling most appeals to you, because I think that that's an important factor. So from my living books, Charlotte Mason background with a little classical flavor, I get the Rainbow Resource Center catalog, the Classical Academic Press catalog, Catholic Heritage Curricula catalog, Memoria Press catalog. I probably get the Seton catalog, but I don't need it. I'll just be honest there. I do go to their website to look at some of their religion and things, and I'm missing something. What am I missing?
Colby, does Colby have a catalog?
I don't know if they have a catalog.
I don't know if they do or not.
I've never gotten it. Not a lot of places. I mean, some of them don't do print catalogs anymore, obviously, because it's an expense.
Right.
And small businesses aren't going to really have that expense. I do go to the websites a lot. And during this season of the year, my browser knows what I'm typing before I type, kind of thing. CHC web.
And you have 20 tabs up because.
Yeah. And so I'm just looking and picking, and really you have those 4 R's of reading, writing, religion, and arithmetic. Writing includes sometimes grammar and spelling and vocabulary and all those other little things. And literature or reading can also include literature depending on their age. Like you're not just teaching them how to read, you're also doing those things. So there's kind of some division there. And then I just have a list: science, history, fine arts, whatever it is I want my focus to be. I will also add that when you're trying to decide, now again, different kind of advice if you're just doing this for 1 year and you're not sure, or if you're committed. If you're committed, you don't have to do science and history every single year. It's actually okay, unless your state law requires it, it's actually okay to, even if your state law requires it, to prioritize one over the other and say, this is going to be a heavy history year, and for science, we're going to watch documentaries, or vice versa, or do it for a semester at a time. We'll talk about those options tomorrow night. You know, it's okay to say, we're going to do science in the fall and history in the spring. Mimi does that, used to do that. I do, like when we look at fine arts and music and art, I have a focus 1 year. This year's focus was art. Next year's focus will be music. That doesn't mean we don't do any music this year or no art next year. It just means I'm going to prioritize one over the other because I can't get that all done. Like, I can't give it, you know, the best attention. Regarding reading and literature for a second grader, do you recommend doing a follow-up workbook page about what they read, or just have them narrate back? I was looking at the MP literature. I do a mix of both because I see value in both approaches. So the MP literature curriculum is fantastic. I love using it. Amy loves using it. Especially for a second grader, I would do like one or a semester, maybe. Like it's a little tedious, I find, for the younger kids. Doing it out loud works really well for my younger kids anyway, which is kind of like going back to narration anyway. But the MP guides give me a really good structure for our conversation. But then we also do just some narration where they're reading and narrating back and reading and narrating back. They always have something they're narrating. So like for us, if we are doing an MP lit guide, then they're going to narrate their history reading to me, or their religion book that they're reading or something, because I like having that. What I think narration does as an English language arts certified teacher, that's what I did. That's what I was going to say, teacher. I'm going to go back to that. What I think narration does is set them up for a strong writing background. Narration is the reason we do oral narration is for them to start to learn how to write. You do it orally at first because their brain and their hand it's too hard to think ideas and write them at the same time. So when you do oral narration, you're doing summarizing and comprehension, but you're also helping them to start writing essays, believe it or not, in kindergarten. They tell you a story about their day, that is like writing an essay, right? So you're helping them develop those languages. And then the MP Lit Guide really focuses on the skills of like comprehension, analysis, vocabulary, those kinds of things. MP stands for Memoria Press. Thank you, Amy. Memoria Press is fantastic because it's one of the few non-Catholic Christian curriculum that I can fully trust to be not a problematic. Even their history and their Christian studies are careful enough to not be anti-Catholic, because I don't know his job. What's Martin's job? Is he director, owner, CEO, somebody? He's Catholic.
Something.
And they have a lot of Catholics that work there. So they're very careful not to be anti-Catholic when a lot of the Protestant curriculum is very overtly like Protestant. Amy, what about your answer to Carol's question? I don't know if you would answer differently. It's okay if you would.
I think I would, in second grade, I would pick one or the other, because I think doing both would be too much. So we use the MP Lit guides, but I've had some years with some kids where I've kind of had to retool it. One of my kids is really good at drawing. So instead of answering all the questions, I'd be like, draw a picture. Those pictures he came up with were amazing. And it was a much better use of his time and talents in making sure he understood what he read than making him write out 6 sentences, making sure to capital letter and punctuation. Like, I just want to make sure he understood the story, and I don't want to take that joy out of reading. So play to their strengths. So I would pick one or the other. I wouldn't do both.
Yeah.
And with Memoria Press, like, they'll recommend 4 to 5 books per year. Go with 3 tops. Like, to keep your sanity, 3 tops. Don't do more than that.
Yeah, and I wasn't specifying in second or even third grade. I don't have them write the answers in Memoria Press. I have us talk about it. that's the priority there. Yeah, that's an option. So super question. Yeah, once you figure out kind of what appeals to you and you kind of have a flavor to your homeschooling, you can, you know what, like which materials to go to first, you know, and be like, I'm going to look at this one first. Other questions?
Where are they?
Let's see.
Oh, you're there.
Deanna, is that you with a lot of background noise? Is it?
Probably, sorry.
That's okay.
I don't have a microphone.
It's
Well,
all
I don't
good.
know where this.
I'm going to mute you just for a second so we can hear Liliana. Go ahead.
So you mentioned, you know, wanting to have all the materials so that you can kind of plan out your year, you know, summer ideally, right? Does that include like the reading that the kids are going to do on their own that they want to read, like, or you're just talking about like workbooks?
So when you say want to read,
Like a reading list.
are you creating or are you just letting them choose whatever?
So with Schola Rosa, they have a reading list.
Oh, gotcha.
And then my daughter, she just wants to like she'll just read whatever she wants to read.
Yeah. If you're not scheduling it for her, if you can just give her a stack of books and she's like, I'll read these in the year, and she does it, and there's no need to schedule her or put them in order, then you don't need to have the books to do your planning. I'd say, because like if I'm going to study something in literature with a kid, whether I have a guide or I just have them narrate, I do want the book so I know how many chapters there are and I know approximately how long each chapter is, so that I can count out what's reasonable for my kid to read. And without the book in my hand, I can't quite do that. But if it's just something they're reading on their own and you're like, at some point this year, you have to read all these books, and you already have a general idea of how long and how complicated they are, so that you're not overwhelming the child. You don't have to necessarily have those in hand to plan and to do all the like logistical scheduling. Amy, would you have input?
The only reason I think you'd need the books ahead of time is just to see if you want to add them to the list. But if you're going off a list that somebody's already curated for you, then I don't think you'd need those until you're ready for your kid to read them. I try to make my kids a list for the school year, but I'm making the list, so I need an idea of what books to read. But even then, I usually don't buy them or get them from the library until the school year starts. It's just this I try to match our history and science. So if it covers our history and science, then I want to add those to the list, but I don't actually have to have those free reading books on hand. I do need our literature books and our history books and our science books to be able to plan that out. But if it's just something they're going to read on their own time, I don't have to plan that out. So,
right. Yeah. And I do keep a list of like those supplemental books that aren't like the core that were, I keep a list and I put a date as to when I needed to either buy it or request it from the library. If it's something that I'm not ready to buy right away up front, then I'll like, I don't put an exact date. I'll put like a month. Like in January, I need to make sure I buy or request these books. February, I need to do these. Because also the way I do, some things we'll do like one semester and then the next semester we'll do something completely different. I don't necessarily, if my budget is tight, buy all those books in the summer. I might wait to buy the spring semester books. But I also might buy them because then there's Christmas. And if I spend my Christmas money on school books, it's not really fun Christmas. But yeah, so that was a good question. That's a good question. I think if it's just something that they're reading and you don't have to tell them, you know, get this book done by this date or get all these books done by the end of the year and someone else has already figured that out, then you don't necessarily need those reading books.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
To just books in general. There was one that was on the list for Schola Rosa, and I got it, and then I didn't really look at it ahead of time. I'm thinking it was about archaeology, but there was something on there that I just wasn't comfortable with my kid, like something about being a ghoul or something, and I was just like, okay, like, because she asked a lot of questions, and I just didn't want to get into that, and so I feel like I want to have those books to look through, but then I don't know if I have the time to look through them. So it's kind of like tricky.
And that's a balancing act, like Amy said, about your time and your resources and your energy. So if you are the type of mom who really wants to make sure you can look through them, then you're not going to be able to give her as many books for the year. Like it's just a time issue. I know that Selena was on a call earlier this week, and she does a lot of audio books through her library that she will listen to at a sped up speed, so she can decide if her kid is able to read the book or not. I never did that. I just never had the time. I focused more on using book lists that I absolutely could trust, and then teaching my kids, and you have to do this as they get older. Maybe when they're younger, you want to focus more on pre-reading, but teaching my kids what we felt is appropriate and not, and to come to me when there was something inappropriate. So the fact that she asked a lot of questions is good, because chances are she's going to be the red flag, and that gives you an opportunity to have that conversation. Now, like I said, at a younger age, you still want to really protect them, but that means that as she grows older and you're willing to give her a little more freedom, she's more likely to come bring concerns to you, right? And so that's a good thing. And there's a point where we can use those all as teaching opportunities, and they're going to see the world, they're going to face the world, they're going to encounter things on the playground or, you know, at grandma's that you wouldn't necessarily want them to encounter. But if you can allow a little bit of, decide on your risk comfort, you know, and say, okay, you can read this book about this, but I want you to know our family really feels this way. Trying to think of an example. Our family doesn't do pranks. My husband is very anti-prank because just a lot of reasons. So for us, you know, a lot of books are like, oh, that's so silly, you were teasing them or so, you know, pranked them. So my kids know from a young age that, like, if there's a book where someone's pranking, we're like, oh, that's not nice. And if I'm reading aloud, I say, oh, that is not nice of them. Or scary things, we don't scare other people or deliberately. And so we're like, oh, that wasn't a nice thing. Like just those little things that you can train them as they grow up, so that when they find it in a book, they come to you. And my older two kids, boy and a girl, in middle school, were comfortable with coming to me and saying, hey mom, the kids in this book are really mean. Or, you know, hey mom, there's like kissing in this book. And I'm like, oh, I missed that, you know. But at a young age, you just, I remember this very key age, especially for my oldest, where her reading level was so much higher than her maturity level that she had to reread books, and we had to read the classics a lot because I couldn't let her read the next level books because they're too maturity wise.
Another thing you can do is there's some websites that review books, and so you can kind of get the Cliffs Notes version of them. So Common Sense Media is one of them, and they'll rate books a certain way. But what's really important is to read the comments, because that will give you a better insight into the story than the actual thing was. And I know there's another one too, Selena mentioned it, but I cannot remember what it's called. But it also reviewed books.
Pluggedin.com
That's it.
has a books page, and pluggedin.com I actually prefer to Common Sense Media because they give spoilers. So and Common Sense Media has like a no spoiler policy or something. And so like, I absolutely, as a mom, need to know how the book ends.
Yeah.
Sorry. So that I know if it's an edifying ending or not. But both, I refer to both, we talked about Common Sense Media and pluggedin.com for books. And also going to Amazon and looking at the 1-star reviews on books and finding out why people did not like the book tells you a lot about the book, because it tells you a lot to look at those 1-star reviews. Excellent point. It's tricky when your kids are voracious readers and the world is full of smut. Anybody else have follow-up questions before we wrap up for today? All right. Well, like I said, when I post this call in the group or even on the event, if you guys think of questions that you didn't get to ask, drop them in there. I'll see them. I'll tag Amy or Deanna or somebody that can answer. And then tomorrow evening's call will be specifically about, okay, now I've chosen what we're going to do, but how do I map that out? And I also think that conversation will help you in choosing if you haven't chosen yet, because it'll help you see, oh, I need to think about, you know, how long this book is, or how much, you know, like Amy said, how much teacher involved it is, or if it's scripted, like Deanna said, some great options. And so we'll talk all about that tomorrow evening and get out our calculators. I laugh because I'm not a math person, but planning takes a lot of like figuring all that out. But yeah, so thank you, ladies, for coming on the call today. I was so thrilled to chat with you and get to know you. And please follow up in the group if you have any further questions. And I hope to see you tomorrow evening.